Negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
Global heritage will unite. We share brilliant values and honor the world's most cherished legacies to pass our heritage on to future generations. Busan invites you, the 48th session of UNESCO World Heritage Committee, July 2026, Busan, Korea.
In our headlines on this Monday, January 5th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping are scheduled to sit down for their second summit in Beijing today, some 2 months after their first face-to-face here in South Korea in early November. Meanwhile, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff confirms North Korea's testing of hypersonic missiles into the East Sea this past Sunday morning in the presence of the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. Elsewhere, the Trump administration strikes Venezuela this past weekend and seizes its leader, Nicolas Maduro, in a military mission that is sparking shock from some and support from others. We start our newscast with team coverage over in Beijing today, where President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese host Xi Jinping are poised to partake in a second bilateral meeting within the hour. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports from Beijing.
President Lee Jae-myung landed in Beijing on Sunday for his 4-day state visit. His meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled for Monday, about 2 months after they met in South Korea. High on the agenda is restoring the Seoul-Beijing relationship, which had been frosty under the previous administration. In an interview with China's CCTV ahead of his trip, President Lee noted that while security cooperation with the U.S. was unavoidable, Seoul-Beijing relations should not head towards confrontation. The leaders are also expected to focus on economic cooperation, centered on supply chains, investment, and the digital economy, with a signing event planned for a number of MOUs. Discussions are also expected on jointly tackling transnational online scam crimes.
The leaders will discuss ways to achieve tangible results that can substantially contribute to the lives of the people in both countries.
North Korea is also on the summit agenda, as Seoul asks Beijing to play a constructive role to revive dialogue with Pyongyang.
Both South Korea and China share the common goal of peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia.
Eyes are also on China potentially lifting its unofficial ban on Korean cultural content that began in 2016. Sensitive issues could also be included, such as China's unauthorized steel structures in the West Sea. When it comes to Taiwan issues, President Lee said in an interview ahead of his trip that South Korea will continue to respect the One China policy. Blue House officials say it's unprecedented to have completed South Korea-China reciprocal visits at the top level in just 2 months.
With the summit taking place amid complicated geopolitics, attention is on President Lee's pragmatic diplomacy and balanced approach, and what it means for the region. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Beijing.
And staying in Beijing, ahead of his summit agenda, President Lee Jae-myung attended a bilateral business forum earlier on this Monday, aimed at spearheading a new chapter of economic partnership. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin files this report.
At the Diaoyutai State Guest House, where South Korea and China negotiated establishing diplomatic relations 34 years ago, President Lee Jae-myung called on the two countries to join hands and open a new chapter in economic cooperation.
오늘의 한중 협력도 산업 혁신과 안정적 공급망을 통해 서로의 강점을 잇고 각자의 시장을 넘어 새로운 기회를 함께 열어갈 수 있도록 해야 합니다.
President Lee made the remarks during the South Korea-China Business Forum on Monday, the first such event in 9 years. Addressing some 600 business leaders from both countries, Lee urged them to help, quote, set sail a ship of Seoul-Beijing cooperation, describing China as an inseparable and valuable neighbor. Emphasizing the need to keep economic ties intact regardless of political circumstances, Lee cited the historical example of Pyeongnam-do, an international port of Korea's Goryeo Kingdom that facilitated trade with China's Song dynasty.
외교적 긴장과 갈등이 있었던 시기에도 평란도를 통한 교역과 교류는 중단되지 않았다는 사실입니다. 이러한 지속적인 교류는 동아시아의 안정과 번영, 나아가 평화 질서 유지에도 중요한 역할을 수행했습니다.
Looking ahead, the president highlighted two promising areas for future collaboration. First, sharing expertise on applying cutting-edge technologies such as artificial intelligence to manufacturing, which could help both countries address structural challenges, including green and digital transitions and aging populations. Second, expanding cultural exchanges to deepen mutual trust, attract investment, and open new markets. The neighbors already share a close trading relationship, with China being South Korea's largest trade partner and South Korea ranking second for China, with annual trade volume totaling around $300 billion.
Attention now turns to the South Korea-China summit on Monday, where discussions are expected to focus on economic cooperation and a series of memorandums of understanding will be signed. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News, Beijing.
Upon arrival in Beijing this past Sunday, President Lee Jae-myung had dinner with members of the Korean community there. Addressing the attendees, the president asserted that restoring relations with China was his most significant diplomatic achievement since taking office. He also voiced hope for his visit to serve as a fresh starting point for greater advancements in bilateral ties. The president also pledged to facilitate overseas voting for South Korean nationals in China, noting the presence of just 10 polling stations. Meanwhile, hours ahead of President Lee Jae-myung's departure for China, North Korea test-fired hypersonic missiles into the East Sea this past Sunday morning in the presence of its leader Kim Jong-un. Our Park Jun-an has details.
North Korea on Sunday fired hypersonic missiles toward the East Sea, with its leader Kim Jong-un personally overseeing the exercise. This was confirmed by South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff and North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said multiple missiles fired from near Pyongyang at around 7:50 a.m. Sunday were detected. The projectiles traveled approximately 900 to 950 kilometers before falling into the East Sea between Russia and Japan, with Japan's Ministry of Defense reporting 2 ballistic missiles. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command also acknowledged the launch, saying it posed no immediate threat to U.S. personal territory or allies, while reaffirming Washington's commitment to defending the homeland and regional partners. Korean Central News Agency on Monday described the event as a hypersonic missile launch training exercise aimed at evaluating the readiness of its hypersonic weapon systems and verifying operational capabilities. Kim Jong-un, who attended the launch, praised the exercise, saying that the readiness and lethality of Pyongyang's strategic offensive capabilities are an effective means of deterrence. The timing of the North's missile launches coincides with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's departure for China and follows the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro by the U.S. Experts suggest the timing was carefully calculated to reflect Pyongyang's claim that, unlike Venezuela, it possesses nuclear and missile capabilities strong enough to deter potential U.S. intervention. Sunday's missile launch marks North Korea's first ballistic missile launch since November last year. This is also the third since the start of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Speaking of Venezuela, the interim government there is now calling for cooperation with the Trump administration following the latter's strikes and seizure of its leader, Nicolas Maduro. This past weekend, that is. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young has the latest.
Venezuela's interim leader has asked for a balanced and respectful relationship with the United States, as Washington warns there could be boots on the ground in the region. This came on Sunday local time as Delcy Rodriguez appeared to bow to U.S. pressure, writing on Telegram that it is her priority to move towards a balanced and respectful relationship with the United States. She invited Washington to work together for cooperation that is aimed towards shared development. This strikes a different tone from her first speech as interim leader, during which she condemned the, quote, brutal use of force by the U.S. in capturing Nicolas Maduro. As Maduro's vice president and oil minister, Rodriguez had previously defended the regime against accusations of terrorism, drug operations, and stealing the previous election. However, instead of Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado, who is seen as a likely interim president candidate, the Trump administration is willing to work with Rodriguez for now, reportedly impressed by her technocratic background in the oil and energy sector. Trump has said if Rodriguez does not do what is right, she is going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. While Washington hasn't specified how it will run Venezuela, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that the U.S. would leverage its oil blockade on the country to drive political changes, including in governance, to meet the national interests of the U.S. and the interests of the Venezuelan people. Rubio, at the same time, denied that Washington needs Venezuela's oil, saying this is not about securing the oil fields. On broader questions regarding America's involvement in foreign affairs, especially with Trump's long-time pledge to reduce U.S. military presence around the world, the U.S. leader said the country is not afraid of boots on the ground. When asked Sunday about a possible military operation against Venezuela's neighbor Colombia, Trump said it sounds good.
Now, we have a very sick neighbor. It's not a neighbor, but it's close to a neighbor. And that's Venezuela. It's very sick. Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
Trump also said he offered to send troops to help Mexico tackle its drug cartels, but that the Mexican president is afraid. As for the fate of the captured leader of Venezuela, a spokesperson for the Southern District Court of New York said Maduro and his wife Celia Flores are scheduled to appear before a federal judge at noon on Monday. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And as mentioned earlier, North Korea has been quick to condemn the military campaign by the U.S. against Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. In fact, some scholars here believe the regime's recent testing of hypersonic missiles may have been a warning of sorts. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung explains.
The U.S. operation in Venezuela surprised many, but one person who could be on edge the most is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In the aftermath of the U.S. action, the regime immediately launched at least 2 hypersonic missiles on Sunday and strongly denounced Washington's capture of Maduro, calling it the most serious form of encroachment on sovereignty. North Korea and Venezuela have long built close ties on the anti-U.S. front since establishing diplomatic relations in 1974. Experts said that Kim was shocked by the incident, adding that the fact the regime tested hypersonic missiles itself shows he wanted to demonstrate himself as different from Maduro, and that nobody, not even Washington, could harm the regime.
The missile test had an indirect message in it that North Korea is a nuclear-armed country while Venezuela is not, and that the two are completely different in that sense.
By launching a hypersonic missile, the regime was showing that it has the ability to strike back immediately if the U.S. or any other hostile forces threaten the regime. Basically, it was to warn others not to even think about trying something against it.
Kim has witnessed cases of regime change in other countries, such as Iraq and Libya, which could have taught him that the only way to survive is through strength. Now, with the capture of Maduro, Kim's belief in boosting strength for survival would have solidified further, making it much harder to start denuclearization talks on the peninsula. Moreover, Kim may have become even more cautious when it comes to engaging in talks with Trump.
Kim will not rush into negotiations. North Korea has already experienced the failed Hanoi talks. So unless he clearly sees a strong U.S. commitment, such as real steps toward a peace system on the Korean peninsula through a peace treaty or the normalization of North Korea-U.S. relations, it will be hard for him to come forward.
With the 9th Party Congress slated to be held within this month, the expert added that Kim will likely further highlight the need to develop both nuclear forces and conventional military capabilities. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
On the local bourse, the benchmark KOSPI is maintaining its momentum, closing its first day of trade for this work week well above 4,400. The index gained over 147 points from its session on Friday to end at 4,457.52 on this Monday. The rally was led by chip makers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, whose shares saw record highs during trade today, with Samsung soaring past and closing above the 130,000 won mark, and SK Hynix jumping over 700,000 won, but closing slightly below that level. Over in the U.S., we are counting down one day to the start of this year's trade show by the Consumer Technology Association, and South Korean companies are promising exciting innovations in consumer electronics bolstered by AI. Our Eun Jin has a preview.
The annual trade show of all things tech kicks off the new year. In Las Vegas, CES 2026 gets underway this Tuesday, January 6th, showcasing the next generation of intelligent machines. Organizers of the Consumer Electronics Show expect more than 4,500 exhibitors, including 1,400 startups. And the show is set to showcase artificial intelligence across consumer tech, alongside a heavy focus on robotics and humanoid robots. Major Korean firms will have their run at the conference. Samsung Electronics will be setting up a standalone exhibition hall for this year's CES, with its presentation titled The First Look, intended to mark the first unveiling of the company's new products and technologies. The standalone exhibition space will cover just over 4,600 square meters at the Wynn Hotel, and its program will include exhibitions, press conferences, and forums under the theme Your AI Companion for Everyday Life. Another frontrunner in physical AI, Korean carmaker Hyundai Motor Group, is set to unveil its next-generation electric humanoid robot. The company's robotics arm, Boston Dynamics, holds a vision of commercializing AI-powered humanoid robots to position itself as a powerhouse of physical AI. The Korea Institute of Science and Technology, as it marks its 60th anniversary this year, announced on Monday that it will set up an exhibition booth at Eureka Park during this year's CES, where it plans to unveil 15 research outcomes. One of which, the Institute's AI and Robotics Research Division, will be showcasing a smart city safety management AI platform that analyzes multiple closed-circuit television, or CCTV, feeds in real time to immediately detect risks such as fires. With companies from over 150 countries registered to participate in this year's CES, enthusiasm for the tech fair remains strong from South Korea, with more than 800 Korean companies set to participate. This gives it the third largest national presence, only after the United States and China. Aside from AI and robotics, participating companies will also be displaying the latest in digital health, mobility, and even beauty and fashion. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, China has been strengthening its enforcement of export controls amid its trade competition with the U.S. According to the Korean Security Trade Agency, that is, of Trade and Industry on this Monday, administrative penalties for export control violations in neighboring China jumped over 70% in the first half of 2025, with 79 cases up from 46 on year. Beijing has expanded controls on strategic minerals, recently adding silver to export licensing requirements, and has tightened rare earth export restrictions on the U.S. Meanwhile, plans to require licenses for products containing Chinese rare earth materials were postponed for 1 year following last October's U.S.-China Leaders Summit in South Korea's Gyeongju city. In the local political arena, the ruling Democratic Party has begun accepting candidate registration for a new floor leader. So far, 4 three-term lawmakers, Chin Sung-jun, Park Chung, Baek Hae-ryun and Han Byung-do have announced their bids. The 4 candidates have emphasized their commitment to stabilizing party turmoil and to securing victory in the upcoming general election. They also pledged to tackle head-on insurrection-related matters and advance reform legislation. The election of the new floor leader will be based on a weighted vote with 20% reflecting ballots from registered party members and 80% from National Assembly representatives. Voting will take place over 2 days starting on January 10th, with the result to be announced later on January 11th. On the cultural front, South Korean actor Ahn Sung-ki passed away earlier on this Monday. The 74-year-old actor had been receiving treatment in an intensive care unit of a hospital here in Seoul after collapsing at home last Tuesday. He was diagnosed with blood cancer back in 2019 and was declared cancer-free a year later, but had been fighting a recurrence in recent years. After making his debut in 1957, Ahn appeared in around 140 films. He's celebrated for his warm public image and decades-long contributions to South Korean cinema.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on Saturday signaled a tougher crackdown as a week of protests over the country's ailing economy shook Iran. In his remarks, he drew a line between protesters angry over the ria's collapse and what he called rioters, saying they must be put in their place. Human rights activists say at least 15 people have been killed and more than 580 protesters are currently behind bars. U.S. President Donald Trump warned Iran on Friday that if it violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States will come to their rescue, prompting Iranian officials to threaten U.S. troops in the region. An armed gang in northern Nigeria has slaughtered at least 30 people and abducted dozens more after attacking a crowded village market. Gunmen on motorcycles descended on Kasuwa Daji village in Niger State on Saturday evening, opening fire indiscriminately on shoppers and traders. The attackers razed to the ground several homes and the market during a 3-hour rampage before retreating into the forest. Local Catholic Church officials warn the actual death toll likely exceeds 40, with many children among the missing. In Syria, the UK and France have carried out a joint strike on a major Islamic State underground weapons cache. Royal Air Force Typhoons and French aircraft launched precision airstrikes on Saturday night, targeting a network of tunnels in the mountain north of Palmyra. Intelligence confirmed the facility stored high-grade explosives intended for a jihadist resurgence. IS reportedly has around 7,000 fighters remaining in the region. UK Defense Secretary John Healey said the strikes eliminated the threat without civilian casualties, asserting that the coalition will not allow the terror group to rebuild its violent caliphate. 주지한, Arirang News.
Although today marks Sohan, traditionally the coldest time of winter, we're not having a severe cold spell. This morning, temperatures started off a bit milder than usual for this time of year, making the cold feel less fierce. It will plunge to -6 degrees tomorrow, colder than today, but will rise back to 4 degrees warmer than today. Skies will be mostly clear around the country, but the air has become drier. Dry weather warnings and advisories remain in place for the eastern areas and the Seoul metropolitan area. With strong winds picking up, the risk of wildfires is high, so please be extra careful with fire safety. Most areas will start cold tomorrow morning, with Chuncheon at -10 degrees, Gyeongju at -5 degrees. Highs will rise to 5 degrees in Daejeon, 9 degrees in Busan and Jeju. From late tomorrow night into the following day, rain and snow are forecast in the north center parts of the country and on Jeju Island. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유의 따뜻함과 약간 사람의 목소리 같은 목소리를 갖고 있거든요, 바이올린이. 저는 무대에 올랐을 때보다는 이제 혼자 연습할 때 더 큰 희열을 느끼는데 제가 표현하고자 하는 음악이 잘 나왔을 때 그때 가장 큰 기쁨을 느끼는 것 같아요. 그래서 저만의 색깔을 어떻게 하면 찾아갈 수 있을까 그걸 제일 많이 고민하는 것 같아요. 아무래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
In Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the latest UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday. Arirang.
President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping are sitting down for their second summit over in Beijing on this Monday, some 2 months after their first face-to-face here in South Korea last November. With more press perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Monday, January 5th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon South Korea's diplomatic agenda in neighboring China as President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping meet for yet another summit today. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Yang Chen-hao from Taiwan here in the studio. Chen-hao, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me here.
I also have Stephen Bork with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, it's great to have you here.
Hello and Happy New Year.
Right. Happy New Year to you too, Chen Hao. President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, as I mentioned in the short clip, are meeting for their second summit over in Beijing on this Monday. First then, what makes this second meeting so significant?
So from President Lee Jae-myung's perspective, to strengthening the ties between South Korea and China carries several clear benefits. First, if China takes a more friendly approach or stance towards South Korea, there is a strong possibility that North Korea could also respond with goodwill, which could help advance the peace and stability in the Northeastern Asia region. And second, China's vast market remains a key target for South Korea as it looks to further expand its export-driven economy. And the third, when it comes to supply chains, China plays a very critical role, and that includes essential materials such as urea and rare earth elements and various metals. Many resources needed for South Korea's semiconductor industry and transportation sector still depend heavily on imports from China till now. And in fact, among 300 product categories for which South Korea relies on imports for more than 90% of the domestic demand, the majority are sourced from China. And maintaining stable relations with Beijing helps to ensure the steady supply of these materials, preventing disruptions that could destabilize the economy and society. And today we also saw that President Lee traveling to China alongside with the heads of South Korea's major chaebols. We can see that Samsung's Lee Jae-yong and SK Group's Choi Tae-won, Hyundai's Chung Hee-young, and LG's Gu Kwang-mo, those presidents from all of these enterprises, together they attended the Korea and China Economic Forum held for the first time in 8 years. And President Lee went on to say that there is a saying that you need a boat to cross the water, and it is the people who decide whether to set sail. So he was asking to launch the ship of Korea and China cooperation, and the Korean government will also work with the Chinese government to create the necessary conditions. And he even added that he hopes both of the countries can raise the sails of trade, people-to-people exchanges, and cultural cooperation, and cross the winds and waves of the Yellow Sea together. I think we just have a report in the last hour. You can see President Lee's showing his eagerness seeking economic cooperation with China.
Right. And Stephen, speaking to China's Central Television ahead of his state visit, President Lee Jae-myung linked the objective of his trip to addressing past misunderstandings and advancing bilateral ties to a new level. What do you suppose are the prospects of such intentions?
The first sign, I think, is just that there was a willingness on both sides to carry out a state visit, of Lee to host, Xi to host Lee. Their two names sound quite similar to ignorant Western ears like mine. And Lee decided that this was a worthwhile thing to go ahead with. And also, I just think Lee chose his words quite carefully. I think it's a skilled diplomatic maneuver to refer to friction as being caused by misunderstandings and not caused by the two sides holding fundamentally different positions. Kind of sets the stage for progress in these talks, because what better way to clear up misunderstandings than to have these kinds of in-person meetings. I mean, I don't know exactly how frank or how casual the two leaders will be when they interact, but this will be a chance to establish some kind of personal rapport, some kind of personal connection. In comments earlier today, Lee mentioned that he visited Beijing a number of times when he was mayor of Seongnam, and the whole experience was bringing back some kind of positive memories for him. That's all encouraging. And another thing that both leaders have said, going back to their encounter in Gyeongju we're at that weird part of the year where we have to refer to things that happened like a month ago as last year. So last November was about a month or two ago. When they met at the APEC Forum, they both referred to the two countries as inseparable. And more specifically, they both highlighted the kind of their shared economic legacies, that these are two countries that came from being primarily low-income, primarily agrarian, to becoming advanced manufacturers with very large middle classes, and that they both played a kind of complementary role in that. That for South Korea, having China as a very large export market was very beneficial, and going back and forth, like China exports plenty of consumer goods to Korea. China has benefited technologically from cooperation and from assistance from Korea. And so they're saying kind of all the right notes, so that I would say that the prospects for improvement in these areas is pretty promising. Earlier today, Lee mentioned that the bilateral trade between the two countries has been plateaued at like roughly $300 billion annually for a number of years. And so that his team's focus on this trip is finding ways to get that number up. Just a few hours ago at a business forum, I think he highlighted beauty products and video games and a number of other areas where he felt like there's room for additional cooperation. He mentioned cultural exchanges in the areas of sports and of popular culture as other ways that the two sides can get closer together. So I think we can conclude that we're seeing some very positive signaling from both sides, and pretty soon the more kind of detailed work will begin as the two teams sit down and try to figure out the details of how to bring that cooperation ahead.
Right indeed. And beyond trade and cultural exchanges, Chen Hao, quite a number of pundits believe that high on South Korea's agenda this time around is also Beijing's potential assistance in approaching Pyongyang. What are the prospects of such partnership between Seoul and Beijing to engage Pyongyang, do you think?
In fact, ever since the democratization of South Korea in 1987, each president, no matter who he or she is, has tried to build friendly ties with China, seeking Beijing authority as a key to open the door to North Korea. And that idea dates back to Notaeul era, and in 1992, South Korea also cut the diplomatic ties with Taiwan and formally established the relations with China. And even former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who had criticized China in the past, took a different approach once he was in office. During his presidency, he adopted a more cautious and more restrained tone toward the Beijing authority. Yoon's first national security advisor, Kim Song-han, he once told us during the briefing, saying that the administration never gave up on the idea that improving relations with China could help bring about change in North Korea. And after President Lee Jae-myung took office last year, South Korea sent more goodwill signals to the north. We saw like Seoul voluntarily lift the loudspeaker broadcast along the border area, and also say it does not insist on unification by absorption, but it is willing to respect North Korea's position and authority. So far, however, we can see that till now, Pyongyang authority has not responded positively to President Lee's gestures. And now, as President Lee meets with President Xi, it's likely he is once again hoping to use China as a channel or as a tool to influence North Korea. But that has become much harder to do. As we mentioned last week on the program here, ties between China and South Korea have been like strained over the THAAD missile defense issues in 2016, and this year marks nearly a decade of that tension. And China has yet to officially lift the restrictions on South Koreans' movies, TV shows, TV contents, and concerts. So-called the Korean ban is still in place. And so today, if South Korea want to change North Korea, it may first have to change China, and that mission is way more difficult now.
Right, and against this backdrop, Stephen, there are quite a number of people who claim that South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines may serve to be a stumbling block of sorts with regard to its ties with China. What have you been hearing on the ground?
It's a very interesting question, because I remember I was quite surprised when in Gyeongju, President Lee mentioned when he was imploring U.S. President Trump for permission to build these submarines, he specifically mentioned that it would allow South Korea to more effectively track North Korean and Chinese vessels in the environs of the Korean Peninsula. And he said this just before, like a few days before his meeting with Xi. And as far as we know, China hasn't carried out any kind of like open or public pushback to that. And, today's summit appears to be going ahead quite cordially. But, just as Chen Hao laid out there quite comprehensively, China has this quite long history of, what we call economic coercion, of using trade and other kinds of economic measures to sort of induce countries towards behavior that they prefer and to pressure countries away from behavior that they do not prefer. And it's a bit hard to parse this because the Korean ban, the restrictions on cultural activities and all the rest that Chen Hao was referring to, like, it's all very kind of unofficial. It's all, you know, the Beijing government like does not, their general practices do not come out and to make like explicit statements that they are doing this. It's just, you know, there are contracts that do not go through. There are visas that do not get approved. You know, I remember when there was a kind of unofficial ban on groups of Chinese tourists coming to South Korea. All of a sudden, the streets of Myeongdong were a lot quieter than they had been, and a lot of retailers were suffering. That was another thing that was never like explained explicitly, but in a positive sign that appears to have. There's a lot more Chinese visitors coming here now, so that's a kind of indication of a thaw. So we won't really know. The THAAD issue is still unresolved. It's not as though South Korea has walked away from it. It's still functioning. So, you know, whether or not this decision to build nuclear power submarines will engender a similar kind of campaign of pressure, we don't know. But one thing we can say for sure is that while Li's team are in Beijing, they will do everything they can to explain this to the Chinese side as best they can and as clearly and as delicately as they can, and try to avoid that kind of economic scenario.
Right. Meanwhile, Chen Hao, speaking as a journalist from Taiwan, what issues might be of interest to Taiwan with regard to this latest summit between South Korea and China?
Indeed, even before the visit of President Li to Beijing, media in Taiwan were already paying very close attention to the interview he gave to the state-run Chinese Central Television, CCTV, which we just discussed, where he said that he respects the one China policy. And in fact, many world leaders, including those in Japan, have made similar statements in the past. But what's worth noting, however, is that many Chinese media outlets and even Chinese netizens, they tend to interpret such remarks as the leader supporting unification. But in reality, understanding and respecting something is very different from actually accepting it. And these are two very different concepts. And probably after our show, President Li is gonna said to hold the summit with President Xi Jinping in Beijing. And what Taiwanese media are watching closely is whether China will press the South Korea leader to take a more stronger or more explicit position on the Taiwan issue. And this comes especially after the shocking news over the weekend that the Venezuela president Nicolas Maduro was captured by the United States troops. Venezuela has long been one of China's most frequently cited allies, friend, and seeing developments like this, I think President Xi himself is likely to be quite uneasy. And turning to the economic angle, in another aspect, China and Taiwan share the same language, and because Beijing has always been seeking to unify, to have like unification with Taiwan, it has historically offered a wide range of economic incentives to attract those Taiwanese businessmen or companies to invest or to stay in China doing business. But as the wages in China have risen and the political atmosphere has become really tense, it is no longer as easy as for Taiwanese companies to set up factories or doing business there. And as a result, over the past decade, we can see that many of the Taiwanese businessmen and companies, they have been withdrawn China. So the key question now is, between South Korea and China, especially when it comes to cooperate investment, what concrete agreements will come out of this relationship, and will they actually help South Korea expand its exports?
Right, and while we await for details of this latest summit between South Korea and China, Stephen, some observers have made note of the timing of the second summit between South Korea and China as it comes ahead of talks planned between South Korea and Japan. What are your thoughts?
My first thought is I wish that Seoul would confirm the timing of this summit with Japan. It's not confirmed yet, and just for personal, selfish reasons, as somebody who covers Korea-Japan relations, if they could announce when this is going to take place, that would be helpful, and it would help us as we discuss this today, so we could give it a little more certainty. I would say it's possible that Lee perhaps wanted to go to China first, just because China is economically a much bigger country and a much more important trading partner for Korea, and he might want to make a kind of gesture of wanting to hear out the Chinese side before going to Japan. Just for context, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi recently made some comments that sparked a kind of something of a crisis in Beijing-Tokyo relations, where she implied that Japan would defend Taiwan in the case of a military operation by China. So Lee, I imagine, in line with his pragmatic foreign policy, with his foreign policy that he has described as being motivated by wishing to maximize the South Korean national interest, I imagine he doesn't want to get into that. He doesn't want to take a position just before embarking on his current trip to Beijing. He said that he respects the one China principle and that he does not wish to cause any unnecessary, any further misunderstandings there. So I think Lee is a very skilled politician, as I've said on these airwaves more than once. Just observing him, I feel like he has he has a knack for how to deliver messages and how to kind of satisfy constituents. You know, he was a popular mayor and a popular governor before he became president. So this seems to me like something that he probably will be able to manage his messaging in a way that he can get his point across to both sides in a way that is kind of mutually pleasing. If he does go to Japan next week, I think that will be a trip that will kind of carry less baggage, just because we're already on a kind of, I don't know what the idiom I'm looking for, borrowed times, when you have time, like kind of unexpected goodwill between Japan and China. Lee has a long history of being kind of strident when it comes to Japan and feeling as though Japan was not a reliable partner and was not sufficiently contritious, had not shown enough contrition for the 1910 to 1945 occupation of Korea. And Takaichi, for her side, has a reputation as kind of hawkish, but the two leaders have been very cordial so far. They've gotten along very well. So if Lee does go to Japan next week, that will be a kind of a bonus, a kind of a sign of like unexpectedly fruitful ties. So I think Lee will probably, while he's in Beijing, he will be pursuing this trip as much more with having a lot more riding on it, a lot more economic and business interests at stake. So I think he's probably focused on that for now, and he's gonna deal with Japan when he gets home.
Right, and keeping in mind what Stephen has just said then, Chin-Ao, if I were to ask you to highlight perhaps three main objectives of the Lee Jae-myung administration, given its latest summit, latest visit to China, what would you choose to highlight?
If I were to rank the priorities, I would put them in this order, in the following order. First, maintaining the supply chain stability, because South Korea has not yet broken free from its dependence on China. And if Beijing were to take the retaliatory measures in the future, such as restricting the export of certain raw materials to South Korea, that could seriously disrupt the economic and society order. We've already seen this before. The urea shortage in the past caused major chaos in the truck transportation nationwide. And that's a clear example of how vulnerable the system can be. And that had happened during President Moon Jae-in and President Yoon Suk-yeol's period. And keeping the supply chain stable is also crucial to ensuring that semiconductor giants such as Samsung and SK Hynix can continue to grow and drive South Korea's overall economy. And second, restoring the cultural exchange and creating a more friendly atmosphere between South Korea and China. Only when the so-called Korean ban is released, can we say the bilateral relations are really back to normal officially. And without that, it's very difficult to move forward with border cooperation in other areas. And the third one will be the economic cooperation, specifically helping South Korea to expand its exports to China. And the fourth, using the improved relations with China as a way to influence influence the change in North Korea. And at this stage, I think aside from the first item, supply chain stability, the other three items I mentioned will be extremely difficult to achieve in the short term. We all understand that ties, cooperations, interactions between South Korea and China are really important. But speaking as someone from Taiwan, I would still stress this. When dealing with China, every step needs to be taken with great caution, and dependence on China should be reduced as much as possible.
Right, and speaking about China, Stephen, then what are the three potential things that the Xi Jinping administration may be seeking to secure given its latest summit with South Korea?
Before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm speculating and I have no special knowledge as to what Xi's plan is. There's a whole industry of China people who are a lot smarter than me who parse these things. These are just my thoughts as to what they might be seeking. The first one is as it pertains to rare earths. I mean, China holds a lot of leverage. As Chen Hao laid out earlier, South Korea relies on imports from China for a lot of these things. Seeing as South Korea as a U.S. ally, I wonder if Xi's team might be looking to set some kind of guidelines as to we will continue to supply with these rare earths, but we want to know how you're going to use them. Is this all just strictly for commercial purposes, or do you plan to use share these with the U.S. in some ways? Are these going toward military cooperation? Is this for military uses? And is the U.S. potentially involved in those military uses? I think they would talk about that. The second one is maybe the most important. I wonder if Xi will try to use his leverage to get access to more South Korean semiconductor technology. A massive variable in the world nowadays is that China has to kind of modify its behavior and kind of keep some of its aggression in check because it still relies on imports of the most advanced semiconductors, and it needs those for its economy. And a really important goal of the Xi administration is to get its own chip-making capabilities up to the point where it no longer needs to rely on imports. And South Korea is a key player in that sector. So I wonder if Xi might be saying something like, well, maybe you could have your best etching or whatever it happens to be technicians come over here and carry out some training for our local people and all the rest like that. And the third one would be, I wonder if they might just talk about messaging on Taiwan, and they might say, we want you to come out with, perhaps a carefully worded statement, but some kind of public gesture that you are not leaning towards supporting Taiwanese independence in any way, that you are, either you are staying out of it or you are kind of taking our side a little bit. That's a very delicate issue, and there's a lot of nuance there, but that's something that at least I think Xi might be looking to impart on the South Korean side.
Right, I suppose we'll find out within the next 24 hours then after this second summit between the two leaders. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Stephen, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
And Chen Hao, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow, that is Tuesday, with yet another panel session on diplomacy. Join us then.